He'd begun to doubt the existence of the Home Office. The complexity of the operation, the number of relays, the span, like conceptually, defied any sort of explanation that stood on its own legs. The two things he believed to the point of knowing were, one, in 1917, his relay station, the one he'd occupied for as long as he could recall, had ceased operation as a turnstile manufacturing plant and spent decades boarded and locked before conversion to its current state. And two, he would be shot dead if he opened the door to leave. The first he'd pieced together over the years from odd scraps of letterhead and stray notices he'd found in the usual out-of-the-way places, propping the usual wobbly furniture. The second, he'd either thought up and came to believe, or had been told by the individual whom he'd replaced on shift, or possibly he'd imagined the person he'd replaced, and so on. Anyway, he had minor doubts, like existential, about the getting shot dead thing. But he believed it more than he didn't believe in the existence of the Home Office, despite how compelling that thought had become. Additional things he was confident in the truth of were that he could read, but only because his turnstile belief had come from papers he'd found, and that he'd had an extensive understanding of the shapes and dimensions of various drive-through, walk-up fast food chains. Some days he'd pass entirely in the occupation of projecting the shapes of crystal restaurants into the shape of the relay station, to scale, in pencil.
Good. Hold right there for me.
Yep.
I want you to jump ahead to days or months could pass between messages, and I want you to narrate it like it's a Ken Burns documentary.
Yes. Days or months could pass between messages. Just enough time to forget messages were a thing, and for the anxiety of isolation to take root. Mechanical clank. The timer began anew. There was no skill in the operation of the message relays. The tubes were colored to match the canister groupings, with textures to indicate subgroup, and so on. Someone had explained it at some point. The trick was to be very fast. Keep Home Office happy. The only skill was remembering that nothing mattered more than the messages.
That's great. I want you to go back for me now. Because I know you've done this before. Can you go back to the first page? The first he'd pieced together over the years from odd scraps of letterhead and stray notices? And read it like a sexy romance novel.
Yeah. The first he'd pieced together over the years from odd scraps of letterhead and stray notices he'd found in the usual out-of-the-way places, propping the usual wobbly furniture. The second, he'd either thought up and came to believe, or had been told by the individual whom he'd replaced on shift. Or possibly, he'd imagined the person he'd replaced, and so on.
Very nice. So you can't think of a single genre of audio of a book that you want to narrate that you've never narrated before?
I've just narrated a wide variety.
I know you have.
But honestly, this post-apocalyptic
So do me a favor. Let's jump back to the days or months could pass on the next page. Days or months could pass between messages. Just do really fucking dark and gloomy. Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, like post-apocalyptic.
Days or months could pass between messages. Just enough time to forget messages were a thing, and for the anxiety of isolation to take root. Mechanical clank. The timer began anew.
Boom. Nice.